Now that we're able to render data on our page, let's see about responding to events. One of the things that we want our event page to be able to do is to allow people to vote for sessions so the popular sessions can be chosen for an event. So let's start by going in, and on every session we'll add an upvote count. Now you can see I'm setting this to 0. Eventually that number is going to change. Now that I've got the upvote count available in each one of these sessions, I'm going to need to somehow increment that count and display it on the page. So we're going to add another little section on our page. This piece of our page will be a voting widget that will allow people to vote up or down for sessions. And here is where we'll actually display the upvote count. Let's see how that looks. Our voting widget looks okay, but I want it on the same line as the information about the session. So I'm just going to move it down inside the row. Okay, that's looking much better. Now if I go into my data and I change some of these upvote counts, they'll reflect inside of the page. That's all great, but what I can't do yet is actually vote. So let's implement the voting. What I want to do is I want to be able to respond to a click event on that little icon chevron up. Thankfully with Angular, doing that is really easy. I just go into my div and I add an ng-click directive. And I want to call upvote session. Now this is a method that doesn't exist yet, but I'll add it. I want to pass in the session that I'm going to be upvoting. Alright. Now let's do the same thing down here. Now since those methods don't exist, if I try to run this right now I'll get an error. So let's go and create those methods on the controller. The first one, if you'll remember, was named upvote session. And that takes in a parameter of a session. Okay, that's simple. Let's add our downvote session. Alright, let's see if that works now. And look at that. Whenever we click that up chevron, the upvote is going up. Now one of the things we should do is clean up after ourselves a little bit and reset the initial upvote counts to 0. Alright, now let's talk about how we implemented that functionality. You can see that these methods, upvote session and downvote session, are very simple. And what's really nice about them is instead of having to take in like a session ID, they actually just take in the session we want to upvote. And that way we don't have to look the session up, we actually have access to the object itself when we want to manipulate it. Let's look at how that's possible. What Angular is doing right here, when we call this method, is it's going to call that method for us whenever we click. And it's going to pass in the session. Well, what's the session? Well, that's defined right up here. The session object inside of the current session. So Angular is actually matching up with sections of HTML the session that belongs to that section. That way we can refer to the session itself rather than having to do something silly like putting the session ID on the data attribute and then looking it up in order to have our code be able to manipulate the correct session. This is one of the real beautiful pieces about Angular, the ability to work with your data directly and not have to worry about constantly passing around IDs, storing IDs and data attributes, and having to look them up everywhere when you want to manipulate one of your pieces of your model. Now of course besides click we can respond to lots of other events, and we'll be looking at that in the next section. But now we've learned the basics for not only displaying data from our model on an Angular page, but also for responding to input from the user and manipulating that data. Now let's have a quick review quiz. Can you use basic JavaScript objects as your model in Angular? Yes. Angular doesn't require any kind of a specialized object to be its model. What is the markup indicator for binding data to a view? The double curly brace is the binding syntax for Angular. Which directive do you use to bind an image's source? You use the ngSource directive. This directive also allows you to delay rendering the image until Angular's had a chance to process and replace the source of the image with the correct value.